Good morning. This is Leanne with Markagy. Today, I am joined by Britney Young. Britney is an amazing talent in the marketing ops space. She's a speaker. She is a whirlwind of getting things done, but like with a smile, cheerfully. Um, I met Britney a little while ago at a Martech World Conference, and so I'm really excited to share with you today um, this conversation. Brittany, tell us more in depth about your background for context to this episode.
Sure. So I've had a very eclectic digital marketing background. I've done a little bit of everything. I've done e-commerce, social media, email, marketing operations, automation, all of that. And over the years, I've definitely uh, got to see some of the pros and cons when it comes to just applying digital strategy to all of those pieces. And so that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. So, one of the things that we talked about was that all of those things have this wide range of possibilities. And when we look at MOPS as a foundation, is it enables us to kind of measure and nurture our strategies, but like tell us more about how you see that piece as a foundation to building out strategy.
Yes. You know, one of the things I'm most thankful for is the time that I got to spend in MOPS. Because prior to really getting into MOPS, I was heavily involved with like just the individual pieces and channels. But I think um, having been a part of like not only those individual channels, but on an actual marketing operations team and seeing like basically what the magic is behind the curtain. It's really changed my mindset when it comes to strategy because a lot of times if you don't know what you don't know when it comes to the best ways to leverage all of the technology, you're very limited in what you could do with strategy. So I think that's having that experience in MOPS has really just changed the way I approach any type of digital strategy now.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Can you run me through like a specific scenario where you really were like convinced? Like what was your aha moment where you're like, "Oh man, I'm so glad that I know this," or like I care, like this is the hill I'll die on and why we need to know this?
Yeah, I think oh man, I do have one really good example from just being a part of a large organization that had access to all of the tools. It was almost like I felt like a kid in the candy store because I'm like, oh my gosh, like you have this, and that. And I'll give a real quick example of a particular campaign um, wanting to leverage personalization. I think a lot of times when at least what I've seen, sometimes when people are talking about personalization, they might just think the basics of um, like adding the first name in an email or, maybe basing certain colors, just very limited, like demographic type ways of personalizing, like email, for example. But because I understood all of the depth of the technology and the power of how those tools all integrate, I was able to come up with a strategy that not only personalized like the person's first name, but we were wanting to connect our customers to their advisors and actually being able to personalize the email to show dynamically show who their advisor was in that email and other important details to just build that customer connection beyond just the personalization of their first name. And we were even looking to take it a step further with some of the images that were used based on very detailed demographic data, like maybe their age, maybe their location, stuff like that, to really truly make it a full personalized experience. But it was because I understood all of the data that we could, pull from like CDP and then use that to inject in the email. That's what was able, why I was able to say like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. And I'm like, look what we could actually do with this. And it really just opened everyone's eyes to the power we had.
Yeah, that's so exciting because I think of companies and a lot of them have more data that can be actionable than they realize. And when you're able to segment in a way where you can provide more like aligned or affinity type of assets within your marketing and personalizing it that way, that really shows a care and a connection that's deeper than hey, first name, like,
Mhm.
okay, is just personalizing by name entry level stakes? I mean, that
Right.
could be it's almost like it's just white noise almost at this point, just to be like, "Hey, first name," like, "Okay, got it." Like, you matched one field. Um, so you talked about having all of the tools in this place. One of the things that stood out from our private conversation was the utilization of tools.
Mhm.
Um, where I'm curious is have you encountered a lot of places where the tool might have the capability, but the people don't realize it, or, there's a way to fully like utilize or finish implementation in a way that makes business sense, or talk about some of those experiences.
Oh my gosh, yes. This has definitely been something that has probably been like a passion and a frustration of mine because I've definitely been in a few companies where we have all the right tools, but the issue becomes the people actually knowing how to use the tool and then the process. Because a lot of times, what happens is if you have a tool and you have people there that don't really know how to use it, and then they're going to build a process based off of their limited knowledge on that tool, and so a lot of times the process is really jacked up because they just don't know what they don't know. And I think that has truly become a passion of mine, where I enjoy being able to move between both spaces of like understanding the technology as well as the business side, to kind of bridge that gap, because that is definitely something I've seen happen very often. And it's sad because a lot of times when you think about it, companies are spending so much money on this technology, and to be so limited in what you can actually do with it. I don't know. It's like they'll never really see the power, or never really get to do all of the big grand things that a lot of these technologies promise, and it's really because they just didn't have the right people and the right process in place.
Yeah. I mean, the most basic example of this comes to mind would be like a Microsoft Excel, right? So you have a tool that can either just list names, or that can do complex calculations, or that can do, like just crazy levels of intricacy. And if you're using a tool like Microsoft Excel specifically, and you aren't aware that you could do a pivot table, or you aren't aware that you could
Mhm.
filter, or you aren't aware of like these functions of it, you're gonna just use it like a Word document.
Yep.
And that's great. You should use whatever tool you need to use to get the work done. But how wonderful would it be if you knew that you could do all of this like amazing things and then did those things, right?
Yeah.
Um I think that that's like the most basic analogy that I have for it. Um so thinking about your experiences with this, and I know that you're aligned really well with like Marketo and some other tools. What specifically is a call out that you wish I didn't prep you for this question? What is a call out that you wish more people knew about Marketo specifically, for they don't know what they don't know?
I would say if you're an organization that's considering Marketo, don't think you could just purchase it and have your existing team use it. Like I hate to say that, but like you need someone, you will have to hire someone that actually knows it. Because I have seen that happen at a couple companies, and you'll end up fumbling around for a few years because the learning curve is a little steep. And even a well-intentioned person who's trying their best to learn it and ramp up, there's just so many little details they're not going to know, and mistakes they'll make. I mean, I've been there. I've been one of those people who literally was thrown in Marketo and had to figure it out. And there's a lot of things I look back on of like, geez, if I only knew this or that, like this could have been prevented. So I think that's one of the major things I would say. If you are considering it, you need to also consider hiring someone with a minimum of probably 3 to 5 years experience in the tool.
Okay. Well, that is I was unaware of that personally. So I'm happy to learn that. Um Now, one of the things that is always an objection to advice like that is, okay, but it's different in every instance. So, do you think that where I personally would overcome that objection is like, well, yeah, but you can't solve for the weird way that someone set up that no one could predict if you don't know the ins and outs of the tool. You don't know how to like streamline it if you don't know deeply, intimately the tool and the way it's supposed to work. Would you agree with that, or can you expand on that?
I would definitely agree with that. And having been across several instances myself, that is true. Each company's been different, but there's a lot of like foundational things that only someone with years of experience in Marketo would know. And if you don't have at least that foundation when you implement something like that, it's not gonna matter, because a lot of times that is what happens is the person, someone will come in that has experience and just be like, why did they do this, what is that, and like trying to fix a lot of issues that could have been prevented had someone with experience been there from the beginning.
That is very important information, and I feel like a lot of leadership needs to hear stuff like that. And I personally, um, when I think about my career, and I think to myself, man, maybe I should double down on my formal Marketo education. And I used to have the mindset of, well, I understand logic. I understand how tools work. If I understand upstream for how the tool should be set up, I could probably figure out downstream the tool itself. But then on the other side of that coin is that certain tools like Marketo, like Pardot, like, some very specific tools have very, very specific things. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
I would say from my experience with Marketo, I would absolutely say yes.
Okay.
Like, and I think having that mindset is great that you could do that, but I just think there's still going to be things you just run into. And with all the well intentions of trying to learn all of it, I just think there's just too much little details that you won't know until you've like had time in it to be like, oh, and like just one quick example of that is fields, for example. So the Marketo to Salesforce integration, there's a lot of weird nuance with what things are called in Marketo and what things are called in Salesforce. And I know that's something that I tripped up on years ago. Now I'm aware of, that little issue of like what it's called here and how that, relates to what it's called in Salesforce. But somebody that doesn't know those little things, you might have your head spinning trying to figure out things like what's the field like lead source, for example. In Marketo, it's called person source. In Salesforce, it's called lead source.
Yeah.
And like there might be some type of I don't know, like operational campaign or something you're trying to do, and you may drive yourself crazy trying to figure out why isn't this working. You might use the incorrect field in like a pick list for something else you're doing. Like there's all these little things that could go wrong just from not knowing that minor detail. And this isn't like there's some document somewhere that tells you those little things.
But when you set it up, you should document your field mapping.
That is true. Yes, that is true. That is
I'm
true.
just gonna I'm gonna be the mom in this situation. Do your homework, document your fields and what you define them as, just to save yourself the like well, not just the re-explanation, but like the reinvestigation of it time after time after
That
time.
is so true.
Um I personally struggle with finishing documentation, but I know how important it is. So that's why I've gotta sneak that in there. Um So, okay, when we think about MOPs behind the strategy, and we think about these very large organizations that have so much data, they've been in existence, maybe they have already had MOPs, marketing operations, by the way, is MOPs, in case I didn't explain that
Oh.
and someone didn't know, because we knew. But back to the point is that as companies evolve, they either um, don't have, software because they didn't need it yet, or they didn't have budget for a lot of these platforms. Um, as they grow and evolve, they either bring in or change out or things happen. So, is there a time where strategy should be defined by what the strategy needs to be? Or how do you like, where do you think building on the foundation of what's operationally tech stack possible, like, starts to be relevant?
That's a good one. Because I have experienced that where it was like like you said, all the pieces were kind of there. I guess in a way it was like backwards. It was like they bought the pieces, then thought about the strategy next.
Yeah.
Um, so I think, I mean, ideally, I the other way around would be helpful. I know that's hard because, like you said, you may start off small, and then as you scale, that's when that becomes more relevant. Um, I think it's still important, depending on what stage you're in, though, to always be thinking about the future. And I mean, that's how I approach a lot of things within MOPS is like, okay, what's it makes sense today for what we're doing, but what would also make sense 5 years from now? Especially if it's something that I think will scale or take legs over time. Um, I always try to approach it that way and make sure that when we are purchasing technology and stuff like that, that this is something that would make sense for today as well as 5 years from now.
Yeah. Yeah, because one of the things that my data engineer dad told me was that a lot of reasons why people don't switch tools is because of the information sink. And all of their data is just integrated into a platform in such a way that it is quite the undertaking to
Mhm.
switch platforms. Um, and that's sort of reasonable. Um, so kind of thinking through this, what I would like to point out is back to 2 points. One, documentation matters. If you're going to be using this for 5 years, you need to document it from the start.
Mhm.
And two is that having that experience and that mindset and that thought pattern before the systems exist can be a huge competitive advantage to developing your strategies, because you know that, hey, we're going to run, these types of campaigns. In order for that to happen, we'll use a tool,
Mhm.
but if we don't set up these steps in the compliance process or in the creation process or in the strategic brief or creative brief, then, we're not going to be able to execute that later on. So
Mhm.
almost a first, can you do it manually, the most painful way possible? And then you get a tool that does it for you. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Um, let's see. So we talked also about bridging people, processes, and technology. And I know that we've kind of gone in detail about those three, but let's kind of bring it together. How would you kind of like do you have a formula, or tell me just kind of how those integrate in your mind?
Yes. So every time I join like a new organization, one of the things I like to do is have a lot of like one-on-one chats with people and hear their story and understand the why first, because I think that's really important. A lot of times, especially if you've been in MOPS for a while and you've seen the good and the bad and the ugly, you can sometimes go to an organization and kind of think like, oh, I know more than them, or they're crazy, they're stupid, why did they set this up this way? Sometimes that is true, but I think it's always important to understand the why. That's like step one. And so a lot of times I will just like, I'm just curious. Like I'll ask, I'll sit with people, within sales ops, with marketing ops, with sales, with whoever, like all the people I'll interact with, and just understand why it is the way it is. And after I have that understanding, also keep in mind each organization is different as well. So there may be a justified reason for why it is the way it is, and respect that. And then going to understand the process and the technology they have, to see, okay, what are some ways we could do this better? Because sometimes it is like they don't know what they don't know, and that has happened to me where I've been able to say like, with this one particular tool, if we were utilizing this and that, we could save our team this much time, or we could eliminate these 5 extra steps that we're doing. And that has been well received, because a lot of times they just didn't know. They're like, oh, I didn't know we could do that with that tool. But I would say that's kind of how I've approached it with the three, before like, trying to attack or give my my thoughts, my opinions. I'm always trying to understand the why and respect what is there, and then from there optimize that to make it better.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's totally fair. Is start with the people. What I'm hearing is, I'm going to repeat this back in summary, is start with the people and answer their needs and their why, and find out if like what job they're trying to do, or what goal they're trying to accomplish, or what tedious painful thing they're trying to execute. Then look at the process of how it's done and look for steps in the process that you can substitute technology with. Um, and so I think that that kind of people, process, technology like flow is really on point, because you are answering for business needs, and you are making it so that you can execute the strategy that you're all there to do, right? Like we're here to make businesses happen. Um,
Yes.
so I've got two questions that are kind of um more about marketing in general, and then you in general. So the first one is, where do you think the future of marketing is going versus where do you think it should go?
Oh, okay. I think the future with marketing, I do think there's definitely more a blend of the technology and people part. I know, of course, like everyone talking about AI, like that's one piece of where I see more of the blending happening. Um, and like with the technology, like yes, AI will help us do more, but you still need like people that understand the technology. So I see a lot more of that merging. Um, and as far as where it should go, I I don't see an issue with like where it's going in that regard. I just think that it will change a lot of our process and like maybe how we think and approach things, which I think is a good thing, because I think a lot of times, in the past, everything has been maybe just the same when it comes to like approaching how you build a campaign and how you go about executing. And I think with leveraging things like AI and all of that, it is changing the way we think and approach marketing, but in a good way. I'm not opposed to it.
Well said. Well said. I'm like, I don't think I have any feedback about that. I think that's really well articulated. So I have one question left. What is a question someone should ask you, but they don't? And I know this is a whopper. It can be anything from what is a question that people are talking about XYZ and they really need to ask about ABC. They have just gone way too far in the journey and they're just completely off base because they went too far. Or is there something about you that you'd love to talk about that you just don't get to talk about enough?
Yeah. I think for me, it's probably the second one with like things I don't get to talk about enough. I do a little bit with college students. I there's some here in Dallas that will reach out for advice on marketing and like how to decide what to do with their marketing career. And I think for me, I always tell them be an avid learner, and this is something I share with even other people that talk to me. I'm like, if you want to be in this industry and you want to do well and you want to continue to grow, you always have to be open to learning. And of course, right now with AI, that I think that's maybe people are starting to understand and see that more. But yeah, that would be my thing. I love learning, but I also love sharing. That's the other thing. Like people that know me know if you ask me questions, whether it be about Marketo or just like strategy things, that is my thing. I love to help other people grow in their skills as well.
I love it. That's wonderful. And I think that part of what makes you so successful is that you are an open resource and that you like to continually learn. And I think in the past year, the way that all of these platforms have been impacted by AI and new gains is that they are changing at a lightning speed race.
Mhm.
So, like yesterday, not even MOPs related, I was doing some graphic design work and the way that the tool functioned, like, it was so frustrating because I was like, "No, like, this is the right button. Why is the button not working the way it used to work?" And it's because I'm not in that platform every single day. It just changes,
Yeah,
and it should grow and evolve. But it was for someone who's not a graphic designer, it was a little bit I felt it that it, needed that continual learning.
yeah.
Um, so that's my fail of the week. Um, if someone wants to get a hold of you, what is the best way for them to find you?
I'm definitely on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn every day, all day. You can send me a message. I will respond. So that's the best way I would say.
Wonderful. And if you're only listening to this on the podcast, it's Britney Young, Young. Um because Brittany can be spelled numerous ways, so I always like
Yes,
to
it can.
clarify that. If
Good
you have a
call.
question for me, I can be reached at info@markigy, markigy.com. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you everyone for listening.